લોકોને સૃષ્ટિ સ્કૂલમાં યુનેસ્કો છે એસ્ટાબ્લિશ થયેલી છે 2 વર્ષ થાય એની આપણે આપણા પોતાના ઘરથી શરૂ કરી આપણે આપણા પોતાના શહેરથી શરૂ કરી દેખાજવી છે યુનેસ્કો એવી રીતે જે કરવાનું છે કરી જ રહ્યા છે પણ આ જે ચેર છે ફોર એક્ઝામ્પલ એ એવા જ
introduce our guest speaker, but more than that, I have a special privilege to let's introduce one of the very dear friend, colleague, student, whom we have kind of mentored since many years. So I was actually not going to do this, right? Devdutt had really sent me a huge number of messages saying do it, and that is in the 12 in the night. So we are saying, Aja, Aja, whatever it is. The reason why he took me for chai coffee was because of that. So I'll try and do my best. So largely, basically, this is the Triple ID Friday talks. The best part about this Friday events are that they are kind of a small session, small talks, and which means it's a closer interaction with the speaker and the audience at this point. Which means that we have a more, let's say, discussion between the speaker and this. We can actually ask the speaker to say whether you would like to have some of the interaction during this session or whether it is basically finished and then you want to have it. But which means you can actually ask all the questions which will not basically pose in the public at this point. So I'm privileged to basically kind of introduce the talk which is Competency Ahead of the Curve. Largely, so we're talking about Geeta over here at this point. She's a UNESCO chair, so established in Srishti in 2014. She's going to head the chair for next 2 years, right? Which means quite a lot of interaction at this point. And Dr. Jyoti Rosalkar was the person who was heading it. Ishita is going to give a much more detailed introduction for Geeta, right? But I thought let me take the privilege to introduce Ishita at this point. Ishita had been my student from first year to final year. And there are very few students who are there whose interest lies in research and writing. That's a very, let's say, a little more niche set of subject. It requires a different frame of mind. So major of the students, when we basically pass out, their larger aim is around 80-90% or more into design practice. So very few rare students were like that. And it was a great support for us to have her in Design Innovation and Craft Resource Center as one of the key researchers. From there, Ishita has moved and jumped kind of quite a long leaps. So she became the coordinator for CEPT Archives. CEPT Archives was getting established at that time and she was the key pillar in setting up and establishing all the systems within that. A very highly organized person going and bloody persistent, right? He would go after you on and on and on and on. Now the best part about her was that in the research center, there are people who come and walk on the steps and you know who it is, right? When Ishita comes in, everybody knows. She comes and she's there, right? And that's her method of working also, that whenever she basically gets involved into anything, she goes much deeper into that. She has been teaching multiple set of subjects at Srishti, from design thinking, local practices, heritage management, creative critical practices, and she's also a coordinator to the UNESCO chair at Srishti. So I'd like to invite Ishita on board.
So it's interesting. I mean, I can read out what you all will also must have read on the email that Geeta is an educator. She's been into the industry for 4 decades, but it's more important coming from me, who was setting up CEPT Archives for about 2.5-3 years, and now I'm talking about taking a jump, taking a leap into research and academics. And the biggest hindrance in this scenario is, am I old enough? Who will trust me? Can I go ahead and do things which I really want to? And I've just been in Srishti for 7 months. I'll not exaggerate. And here I am. I've got her to come here and present. That's the kind of leap that Geeta gives to all her students and all her faculty members. She looks at us with so much of respect for who we are and whatever be our achievements. None of the faculty members are at the same level or at par saying, okay, everybody has 15-20 years of experience. So she really doesn't count. As we say, no, age is not a number. And that's the kind of respect Geeta gives. Apart from that, Geeta has been setting up educational models. That's her profile actually. She's been associated with the Media Lab at MIT. She is the founder director of Shrishti. She's also a member of the Ujjwal Trust, which actually runs more than one education institutions. And she currently holds the UNESCO chair. Even there, actually, she's humble enough to say the institution holds it and not her, which is very nice of you, Geeta. But actually, it's more important that she holds it because that allows Shrishti to channelize the work that the chair wants to do in different sectors, which we will share with you right now. Welcome, Geeta.
Thank you to the chairperson, the committee members, Triple IT, and for all of you for coming here and for hosting me and for the very warm welcome. I'm proud of Ishita too. I'm proud of all my team. As you can see, I have spent 4 decades in education, and it's really nice to bring up a new younger generation. But every time when new young blood comes before you and they give you that optimism for the future, then you just have to embrace them and encourage them because they are tomorrow. We've had our run, right? So it's about encouraging them. Apologies for this. I was presenting at the Kochi Biennale 2 weeks ago, and today when I was correcting the slides, I didn't have anybody with me to help me change that. So I've just used the placement from that. So I don't want you to think that it's a talk that's being repeated. I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy because that's where I am with things right now. And then Ishita will follow up with the actual nuts and bolts of how the UNESCO chair works inside Shrishti. So for that, she will come second. I'm going to talk really from the point of view of philosophy. And so consciousness as confluence is the title of my talk. And before you go on to the next slide, Ishita, one of the reporters just asked me what the UNESCO chair could achieve. And first, yes, I am only a holder of the chair. The chair was actually given to Dr. Jyoti Hosagraha, who came and established the chair inside Shrishti and all the work that comes out of the chair. However, she was seconded back to UNESCO, who took her back for 2 years because she is now Director of Creativity and Culture. And so UNESCO said, well, let the chair stay with me until she comes back in, I think, May of next year. So we're almost 1 year through of my holding the chair. But it's been a pleasure because I've got to learn a lot more about what the chair does in first person. Part of what I've been worrying ever since this, I took over the chair is any kind of change we want. The UNESCO chair is in culture, habitat, and sustainable development. And to me, that represents confluence. It's not one idea, it's many ideas. And when you're talking about many ideas and you want to bring some sort of better quality of life, livelihoods, aspirations to our places, to our cities, to our people, to our environment, then it's not a change that can be mandated only by policy or by education. It needs something at the level of self. It needs consciousness. It needs something that happens inside. Right? And so I'm going to talk about how I have interpreted this idea of consciousness in contemporary times that we all live in, at the confluence of all these different issues that come in when we look at culture, habitat, and sustainable development. And that's a picture of a current classroom in Shrishti, which kind of shows you how far it was from the 20 years ago when we started it. And this is a foundation project that they did in a few days. So the whole nature of design and design education suddenly changes, right? Because you wouldn't expect this kind of work from a student who's just out of high school within the first few weeks of their class. I'm going to stand here. I have a tremor. I can't apologize because it's a physical condition, but this will help me not shake so much. So I'm in 1959. Lord C.P. Snow. He wrote this very famous essay, which many of you may have heard about or read, which was called The Two Cultures. C.P. Snow lived in an England that had a very elite form of education, Oxford and Cambridge. And he said Oxford and Cambridge represented what he called the literary arts. He's in fact quite scathing about it when he talks about the two sciences. And he says that here we have the world of the physical sciences, and then you have the world of the literary arts. And in his view, in 1959, the United Kingdom and Europe and most parts of the world, if you said you were educated, it meant you were at Oxford or Cambridge and you came back authored, lettered, elite, could write and read very well, poetry, prose, but could you actually do very much? He said no. And he was comparing it to the revolution in physical science at that time, the coming up of the Imperial College, and he also juxtaposed the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution. Both are kind of one leading to the other. But the central text of his essay, for which he was hounded and he had to give many rebuttals, was ideas of progress, poverty, and equity. And one of the lines that is always stuck in my head when I reread his book, which is a 59 lecture, is, can the world really afford an education that produces these highly articulate literary professionals coming out of elite institutions like Oxford and Cambridge, and the rest of the world lives in poverty? You know, how can we redefine education? How can we use science? How can we harness the power of the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution to bring people out of poverty? And quintessentially, that is still the dilemma of our times. And it is still the dilemma of the subjects under which the UNESCO chair operates. What do we do about poverty, progress, and equity? Because progress, as we know, is destroying our planet. So how do we bring to education something which is not rooted in this binary? Now, sometime around 2004, I was fortunate enough to meet a man, Roger Molina. He is now in Austin, Texas. He's the son of Frank Molina, who founded NASA. He's an astrophysicist. But he was talking to me about the C.P. Snow lecture, and he said, Geeta, we are moving from binaries of two cultures, sorry, that should be off, to maybe 5 or even 10 or more networked cultures. He says, we're no longer in a world of two. You know, we're now, and these were how we articulated it that day. The first, he said, is a culture that comes from the arts, media and entertainment. The second from sciences, technology. And I'm going to stop here for a minute before I go on. If you look at those three, progress is defined by the dominance of funding. And the dominance of funding comes to technology, not to science. Right? So even if we take environmental science or ecological science or spatial sciences, when you look at sciences, the dominance goes to technology, it goes to engineering and engineering sciences. It does not actually go to the culture of science at all. And we've seen a decline, as you know, in this country, of people actually wanting to study science. Most people want to study some sort of engineering or information technology kind of degree. Now, media and entertainment thrives because it makes money through the consumer world. So while the arts may not, media and entertainment definitely does. But what the disruption of digital technology has done is it's created two more cultures. One which allows people of similar worldviews, even if they're memes. A meme is a virus. You don't have to believe in the virus. The virus does not really, you can host a virus in your body whether you want it or not. It's a parasite. It lives, thrives, builds, destroys. So ideas can lie in our heads. That something is great, you know. Right now we've all eaten turmeric forever, but suddenly now everybody's telling you turmeric will save you from Alzheimer's, or so turmeric will. These are ideas that populate our head whether we believe it or not, and marketing uses it a lot. But we have a network of worldviews, a culture that globalization has created. So people are connected by social media, they're connected by the internet, They're connected regardless of their culture, ethnicity or background, but they are associations, groups of people who have this. And the last are context, situations, social groups, localities. Very, very powerful today because of the network culture, right? And the resurgence of certain situations and social groups and local groups which kind of get into forming a working group culture is coming from the disruption of technology, because technology can create a new culture. So now, we still have our time shift sitting over there, okay. So the argument I'm making is that we are in a thing of time shift, where and I'm using the word art making instead of design, because I'm taking a bigger word, I'm taking a more creative word, right? Because when you start looking at design, you're only looking at problem solving. You're saying something has to go bad before I go back and fix it, right? But art making says, I can make a sculpture, I can make a city, I can make anything I want from my imagination, because it's something that has to exist. So I kind of nest design inside the larger world of art making for the purpose of this talk. So I'm saying if we are talking about art making in a time of ecological and environmental crisis, and on that there's no argument at all. We are in a state of ecological and environmental crisis. Then there are 2 points that I argue for. And I argue for this pedagogically within Srishti, I argue for it with the UNESCO chair, I argue for this in every forum that I go to. The first is called the art of the long now. There are many people who belong to this community called the long now. Kevin Kelly belongs to it, Stuart Brand belongs to it, Chris, I can't remember his surname, but he's the man who started the TED Talks, he belongs to it. And the long now is that when you are designing, when you are making art, when you're making anything that's creative, don't do it for today. Do it so that it look at it the long and distant future. In fact, Stuart Brand writes about the clock of the long now. And he's saying nature and evolution goes at a very, very slow incremental pace. When we design, we disrupt things to do something for today. He says, don't do something for today, build for the future, and let that future be a very, very long time away. Now, this poses great sense of challenge when we're talking to young people in college. And a great challenge, because they want to fix things now. So it's about how we define an assignment. And what we're doing in Srishti is we're redefining well-being. We don't take on projects unless we know we're working with a quadruple bottom line. First the earth, then ethics, empathy, and lastly earnings or business. So the minute you talk to students and you tell them, well, you have to design something for a very long way into the future, and you have to start looking at, because we're in an environmental crisis, an ecological crisis, you have to look at life cycles or impact on the earth or anything that's going to happen there first, and then you're going to look at ethics, you know, whose water is it, whose land is it, whose air is it, what are the things. Then you go and empathize with the user and say, well, I'm going to design for the user, so I start my user studies only after that, and then I actually I develop a business, but I don't develop a business only with a short-term view of profit. I put the profit into a long-term view. We run a lab there now which is called Impact Edge, and we're actually formulating this in a lab that actually tries to work at developing businesses which will have a lasting positive impact on the environment. The second kind of art making we want to work on now, there's again no argument that we are in a time of terrific social unrest and global turbulence, right? I mean, nobody cares that Aleppo doesn't exist anymore. It's been bombed out of the world. The number of people who are dying in the boats and children washed up on the seas. Do we even think of what is happening in Jammu Kashmir, in Nagaland, or in another part of the world? We know about Trump because it's okay, he's a big and powerful man and he's got his hand on a lot of buttons that will affect us. But to be quite honest, what's happening in Delhi University is worrying too. And they come with that last world, not worldview, but remember that networked culture that I said? Our youth are part of that last culture. They have their own ethos, they have their own way of making sense. So then, what do we do? When we've identified two kind of big ideas, one I call creative placemaking and the second critical making. When we talk about creative placemaking, we're living with people who are on the move all the time. Migration, whether it's middle class migration, student migration. I have a center in Trivandrum. It's much more of a culture shock for a Gujarati student to come and study in Trivandrum than it would be for a French child. Right? It also place, identity, belonging, movement, memory. So when we're talking about social unrest and global turbulence, how do we look at creative placemaking? And I'll give you an example of a project I did at Harvard, where we were working with a small town in Portland, Maine, which had just received its third or fourth bunch of immigrants who were coming